Okay, as you can imagine, this past week has been extremely trying, and I want to express my deepest gratitude for all of you sending warm words of encouragement and support. It's been wonderful. I don't know how far I could have taken it without those. And thanks also to those who phoned and faxed the Vernon Lodge with their concerns in the name of freedom of speech. I'm very grateful. I oftentimes felt like I was a one-man army crusading for truth, justice, and freedom. But now I know there are many of us, and together we can and are making a difference. Also, of course, a special thanks to David Icke for making our job so much easier. Last but not least, a thanks to our comrades, Steve Herron and David Lethbridge, for pissing us all off enough to stand up and defend our constitutional rights.
Thank you. I think could you just turn that mic off, and then I think I'll be all right. Am I all right now? Right. Right. Well, thanks for coming. You know, I thought that I'd run out of great mysteries of life, but I just discovered another. How come that so many people who claim to be anti-fascists go around acting like them? I mean, is that me or what? I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing. Anyway, I hope your bums are nice and comfortable, because I've got a heck of a lot to talk about tonight and get across. Anyone who came last time, the whole thing has moved on a great deal, because I've spent the last year accumulating an enormous amount of information. I'm putting it together in a book called The Biggest Secret, which is going to be seriously thick, to document in great detail what I can really only summarize tonight, because it's such a big story, but it all fits together like a glove. And it's a very important time at the moment, because you know, there's a lot of challenges about, and I understand. Have you heard there's an asteroid heading for the Earth? Have you heard that? Yeah, apparently there's three possibilities of what's going to happen. The first one is that the asteroid lands in the sea, in which case there'll be a massive tidal wave and all life will perish. The second scenario is that it lands on the land and creates a dust storm which shuts out the sun for months, and the result is all life will perish. And then there's a third scenario, that the asteroid hits Revenue Canada. And the scenario is that all life flourishes from then on. Actually, another great mystery we're going to answer tonight is how Bill Clinton becomes President of the United States. People like Mulrooney become Prime Minister of Canada. Have you heard the latest about Clinton? I heard it this afternoon on CNN. You know CNN, Claptrap, no news. You watch that one. Well, it's a new scandal, apparently. Clinton's out jogging near the White House, you see, with two of his security guards. And he's jogging through the virgin snow. He didn't realise what that was. The security guards hadn't pointed out. They're jogging through the White House and out into the street. Suddenly they see this patch of gold in the snow, and they run up to it. And Clinton sees that someone's written in the snow, Clinton's a jerk, in wee-wee, you know. So Clinton's outraged, like, isn't he? You know, I mean, his flabber's never been so gasted like that. So he orders an FBI inquiry into this outrage and aspersion against his character. So about a week later, the head of the FBI turns up at the White House and says, "Excuse me, Mr. President," he said, "that little incident last week, we completed our little report. He said, it's not so much, Mr. President, that I've got some good news and some bad news, he said. I've got some bad news and some worse news, Mr. President. He says, the bad news is, he said, we've had the urine sample analyzed and it definitely belongs to your Vice President Al Gore. He said, but the worst news, Mr. President, is that the message was written in Hillary's handwriting. Visual joke, visual. So, what I'm going to do in the first half, and I'm going to talk about half an hour, 40 minutes after the break too. I'm going to pick up this story of the few controlling the world right back in ancient times and bring it through right into the present day and show that there is not just a weaving of knowledge and a weaving of secret societies through this period of time, but there's also a weaving of bloodlines. There is no accident that the Eastern establishment of the United States and the royal families and the aristocracy of Europe are obsessed and always have been with interbreeding with each other. They marry on the basis of genetics. That's the way it works. There's a reason for that, which we'll get into as we go along this evening. But before I start into all that, anyone who hasn't heard me speak before, just want to cover something I always cover at the start, because one of the big questions, perhaps the biggest question and reactions that you get when you're talking about a tiny few, and my goodness me, it is tiny, that run the planet, is it couldn't happen. The sad thing is, it's a piece of cake. And indeed what's been happening in Vernon in the last week or so is a classic case of that. You know, I mean, the guy at the Vernon Lodge gets one phone call or two phone calls, pulls the plug. Doesn't check if what's being said is true, blah, 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 least line of resistance, and it's all a done deal. It's so easy because of the state of humanity's in. And the way that we're manipulating, and always have been, is through the mind and the emotions. We are, all of us, aspects, indeed not just aspects, we are everything that exists. Open-minded science, going into deep physics and subatomic physics now, is increasingly, as more and more scientists wake up, they're increasingly showing proof that everything is the same energy in different states of being. So therefore, we are that energy. However, we can access great chunks of it, and all the knowledge, wisdom, inspiration it contains, or we can live in a fraction of what we are. And the reason a few control the world is that coming on or what?
It's zero or what?
Oh, what is it?
For what?
Oh, I'm pressing the reverse. It's all right, don't worry about it. Actually, that's an interesting slide. That's the mind of Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle, this is a true quote, I'm not kidding you. Dan Quayle, when he was vice president, he came back from South America and he said the following: I love Latin America. I only wish now I'd have studied Latin at school so I could converse with those people. There we go, we're there. So, we're a race of infinite beings living in a fraction of what we are. And if you look at how a herd of sheep is controlled every day, two states of being, barbar and fear. Vast majority just follow the one in front because it's in front. That accounts for most of the sheep herds every single day. And the few that don't conform to that, they get a dose of fear from the sheepdog, and then they conform, and in a few minutes, vast herds of sheep are exactly where a farmer and a sheepdog want them to be. And when you then reflect that barbar and fear mentality, which controls the sheep herd, into the human situation, we've actually gone one step further, because we not only operate like sheep, following the one in front, a politician, a professor, someone with letters after their names, whatever, we also police everyone else and act like the sheepdog. So the same people conform to these imposed norms of reality, of right and wrong, and all this stuff, and then insist that everyone else does the same. Because the key that allows the few to control the planet is it's become a crime to be different. And if you look right back into history, whatever the society is and whatever its norm was, it policed those norms, and being different was a crime. Ridicule, condemnation, even worse when we go further back. So this basic structure of setting norms, getting vast majority of people to conform to them without thought, frightening the rest or most of the rest into conforming through fear of being different and the consequences of being different, is the basic structure that can be charted right through known human history that has allowed the few to control the world. And all that's happened as we become a more globalized society with the computers and stuff, and the mechanism of communication, is what's been happening in different societies all over the world for thousands of years has now taken a global expression. And so that means a very simple truth, which can be observed all the time, every day. If you can set the norms in society, you create the mental and emotional sheep pen which the vast majority of people will occupy through barbare, and most of the rest will occupy through fear. In other words, you got. And if you look at who controls those norms, what sets them? The education system. Who controls that? Same people. Who controls the media? Same people. I mean, the media is a classic example, and again, what's happened here in the last week is a very good expression of that. I mean, I was a journalist for years in England in the 70s. I never met one journalist in that time I had a conversation with that didn't relate to the normal, accepted norms of life. In fact, it makes life quite a hassle if you're a journalist who wants to write about things that are different. So, this basic structure can be charted through history to the present day, and if it wasn't there, what I'm going to talk about tonight would not be possible. You know, I keep hearing about, what we've got to do is arm ourselves. I guess that's a choice that people have to make. I don't see the point in that. I don't see the point in meeting violence with violence and giving people the excuse to blow you away with far more sophisticated technology than anyone in the population will ever own. And all that does is meet an attitude to life with the same attitude to life, just got a different name on it. If we can step out of these manufactured norms and stop policing each other, then the diversity of human experience, the diversity of human view, breaks up the herd, and without a herd mentality, the few cannot manipulate the mass. Everything comes from this. We are manipulated through our mind and emotions, so if we take back control of our mind and emotions, this is all over. And the basis of what's occurred through this long period of time that I'm going to talk about tonight is that, basically. And I'm going to go into some areas very soon, looking at where this has come from, which will probably be very challenging even for a number of people in this audience. If I had to say one way that we are manipulated, it is through the manipulation of belief. It's the intention to get someone to rigidly believe something. I don't care if you rigidly believe what's in the Bible, or you rigidly believe what's in the Quran, or you rigidly believe what Joseph Smith wrote, or supposed to have written in the Mormon Bible, etc., or whether you believe in the Communist Manifesto, as long as you believe rigidly in something, they got you. Because then you're shutting yourself off from other possibility. The only way to research this stuff in a way that uncovers what's really going on is to do it without belief. and just follow where the information takes you without shutting it out because it's challenging your belief system. Won't go there because I don't want to know what's there. And so I've gone in the last year into some very interesting areas that will challenge a lot of people. But in the book, The Biggest Secret, which should be out by January, I'm going to document what I'm going to talk about here in very great detail. So that's the basis up to the present day of how the few control the mass. The few at the top hoard significant knowledge. Knowledge about the nature of life, who we are, where we've come from, all these things, the nature of possibility of technology. And they keep the people in ignorance of that and try to get them all to believe something rigidly, and in their self-righteousness dismiss anything else that questions that belief. And it's a wonderful structure for control. As we go along tonight, some of the things that have been suppressed in the past will become clear, but I just want to talk about some of the things that are going on today. Since I was last here, I met a guy in America who asked to meet me. We had this meeting, and he was a lovely man, family man, and he works for the CIA in scientific research against his will. And he's a genius. And there are loads of people like this around the world. They want their genius, which could help to set people free, but they want to use that genius to advance this agenda, which is the opposite of setting people free. And this guy was telling me he works in the really secret projects that go on in underground bases all over the world. He's obviously based in America. And he said that technology exists now, and has done for many, many decades, for free energy. Free energy, literally. Cost-free. Accessing the natural electricity and energy of life that we live amongst and turning it into usable warmth and power, cost-free. Why is that suppressed? Because the more that we need to earn to survive and live, the more we are forced to serve the system to raise the money to pay for the things we need to live. So free energy, no more utility bills. My goodness me, we can't have that. They'll all want to do it. The technology exists now, and has done for some time, to create abundant growth in deserts without any water, using magnetics, stimulating growth through magnetic energy, which is what we are and what plants are and what everything is in the end. All this exists now. The technology to cure now, today, as people all over the world put their money into cancer charities, shaking tins, people out of the goodness of their hearts at that level, but where does that money go? Straight to the drug companies who just want to keep us in ignorance of the fact that cancer has been curable for a long, long time. Same with AIDS, curable. Now, and all these other things. But we're not allowed to have them because there's an agenda that says that mustn't be in circulation. So I said to this guy, why do you do it? Why do you do this then? And he said, this is why I do it. He opened his shirt, and on his chest were two little polythene patches with kind of liquid in them, coloured liquid, drugs I learned was in there. His body has been manipulated to need those drugs to survive, or it starts to die. Those patches, as they are known in the trade, have to be replaced every 72 hours or he starts to die. When he refused to do something a couple of years ago, they didn't replace the patch for a few weeks, and he started to die in a very painful way. And that's why I do it, he said. Because if I don't, I'm not here. And so the reason that he tried to get hold of me was because his frustration, just wanting to do what he could to get out what was going on, even though he was in the position he was in. So this is the scale of what's going on, and when we uncover this, the technology that's available is just incredible. That will set the world free in so many ways from the prisons that have been created today. But this guy said something else to me, which I found very interesting and threw me into a whole new area of research, which I'm just going to go into now. I heard from many different sources over the years that behind this global elite is some kind of extraterrestrial force, extraterrestrial race or races. So I just threw the line out to this guy. I said, what do you think of this stuff, that there's extraterrestrial involvement in this stuff that's going on? Very matter-of-factly, he said, yeah, of course there is. I said, well, have you seen them? He said, yeah, I've seen them. They're in some of the underground projects, secret projects that I've worked in. I said, what do they look like? He said, apart from something different about the eyes, they look like you and me. So I then started to think. First of all, the bloodlines, and we'll go into this as we go along, because I've looked into genealogy, and it's fascinating where the people who run the world today come from. They just happen to come from the same genetic lines that have actually run the world through thousands of years. It's just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So that I started to think, hey, these people are obsessed with interbreeding. Could that be connected? And then I started to ask a few simple questions about mysteries of life, which are like just deaf to go, because we don't want to get into there. It might get us into some interesting areas we don't want to talk about. For instance, science cannot even begin to explain the quite glaring contradiction between the fact that there was an apparently primitive population in the ancient world, thousands of years BC, while structures were built that literally we would struggle to build today. How come? There's a structure at a place called Baalbek in Lebanon, built thousands of years BC, that involved moving 3 chunks of rock, which have become known as the trilithon, at least 1/3 of a mile. Each of those rocks, 800 tons in weight, and they put one of these 800-ton rocks 20 feet up in a wall. Excuse me, how do they do that? How do they build the pyramids? They've had an effort to try to build some of these things and struggle with today's material. How come? The top of that, this is at Easter Island, another great mystery of the world. That hat weighs 10 tons. How do they do that? These primitive people. Look at this is in Peru. That was built in the ancient world. And just look at the technology necessary to do that. You can't get a piece of paper between these things. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, that's right. Who did these things? These are the Nazca lines in Peru. They scratched away, in some way, these lines to reveal the white surface underneath, and you can only see some of these things from 1,000 feet in the air. They were only noticed when we learned how to fly. Who did these things? And then there's one in England which is remarkable in the sense that it was a quite staggering prophecy of the eventual arrival on the planet of Bill Clinton. No, that's a joke, that one. That's actually true. That's in Dorset in England, which was done in the ancient world. Yeah, that's right, yeah. I think we've had enough of that one. So, the question is, again, you look today, that's Stonehenge there. And here is what has become known as crop circles, or crop formations more like now, since the 80s. I've been in that one, you know, it's like walking to a nuclear power station. That's the main road from London to Exeter. And that appeared within 45 minutes during the day, because a pilot went over there to an airfield over here, a place called Thruxton. 45 minutes later came back. It wasn't there when he went, but it was there when he came back. And of course these things are hoaxed, and were hoaxed in the past to try to discredit this phenomena. Because there is something that connects, and this is where so much research into this, I think, misses the point sometimes. You've got people researching into why the photographs of the face on Mars and stuff that have been found were actually produced in a way recently that tried to discredit the whole idea. Why are these things, why are the classic bloodline families like the Rockefellers involved in controlling the investigations now at Giza into finding artifacts and whatever, which would give us a greater fix on the ancient world? And people are investigating these things, people like Graham Hancock and what have you, who write the books on this stuff. But what so many people miss is that when you just come back and look at them, they are all connected. They are manipulations within a big manipulation. We need to get our vision back to see that. What connects them all? Connects them all is things that would wake us up to a greater vision of possibility of who we are and the nature of life and where we really came from. What I found in the time, thanks. What I found in the time when these crop formations started to appear and then get more and more intricate in the 80s is people I know who would go around and they wouldn't even think about anything, people I knew. It was like, oh, is the price right on tonight? What's that then? And they were saying, hey, have you seen these crop things? There's more to life than meets the eye, isn't there? And then the scientists came along, if you remember originally, when asked what caused them, and they said, it's the wind. I was just saying last night in Vancouver, I don't know what they'd been eating when they created that program. It's ridiculous, isn't it? So and then what happened was that in came the campaign to discredit. A couple of guys called Doug and Dave arrived and say, we did them all, totally ludicrous, and they hoaxed a few, and the whole thing is forgotten. They're still appearing in England every summer. They're getting more and more amazing, but never appears in the media. Because, and everyone knows that Dave did it. That's right. It's all hoaxed. So there's a reason connecting all these things, and it's to shut us off from opening our mind to a bigger vision of possibility. There's just a picture for anyone who has a problem with the fact there might be other forms of life of the kind that we are around. There are 100 billion planets in this galaxy and an estimated 100 billion or more galaxies in this universe. Traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second, it would take 4.3 years to get to the nearest star to our sun. And yet, it's become more credible to say it's all a nonsense that there's any other life forms than it is to say there is something wrong somewhere. Can you imagine going, oh, he's bloody mad. He says there's other life forms in the universe more evolved than me. So I started looking into this, and of course, in the modern expression, there's a vast, massive books about experiences that people are having today, more and more, particularly since the end of the Second World War. And of course, this whole UFO extraterrestrial area is absolutely awash with disinformation. But disinformers don't disinform just because they like doing it, or some do, I guess, but most of them don't. They disinform because they're trying to throw muddy the waters so we don't see the kernel of truth that's in there somewhere that would open us up to what the hell's been going on and is still going on. And it's interesting that what I started to do was look at what survives of ancient texts describing the ancient world, describing the gods, and then looking at how contactees and abductees today, or what have you, are describing the people that abducted them. And because I've spoken in, 16 countries since February last year, I've been able to meet people in all these different countries who are telling me the same story. I spent 5 hours with a Zulu shaman in this February in South Africa called Credo Mutwa. And he was describing to me the extraterrestrial experiences of the Africans, and he was describing the same things that are being described by people in America. Incidentally, Zulu, the word Zulu actually means people from the stars. They think they're a royal race because they say they came from the stars. And so I started having a look at this stuff. And I started to realize that there is evidence in the ancient world which has really not made the mainstream, not surprisingly, which is absolutely devastating to the conventional version of history. I've heard that the Dead Sea Scrolls are being suppressed and all that stuff because they don't want us to know what's in them and it's a scandal, and I agree with all that. But what has been suppressed more than anything else in terms of mainstream knowledge is what was found in 1850 in what is now called Iraq. At a place called Nineveh, which is now near the Iraqi city of Mosul, something like 25,000 clay tablets were found, which were buried thousands of years BC by the Sumerians, or from accounts that led back to Sumeria anyway. And these completely rewrite conventional history and make sense of what appears not nonsense at the moment. First of all, they talk about the fact that an extraterrestrial group, which they call the Anunnaki, which translates in Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came down thousands, hundreds of thousands of years BC, and interbred, indeed created what we call Homo sapiens. And they describe how it was done in what we would call, originally, test tube babies. Now in 1850, what a joke. In 1950, what a joke. What they described, humans are now doing. These texts, thousands of years BC they were buried, describe the solar system and depict the planets in it that we have only confirmed in this century. They describe what Neptune and Uranus look like in ways that have only been confirmed in literally the last few years. And when the probes went out that eventually showed what Neptune and Uranus looked like, the experts were expecting something very different. What did they find? What the Sumerians said thousands of years BC. You look at the Dogon tribe in Africa, apparently a primitive tribe in Mali. When white people first started questioning them about their beliefs and knowledge, these Dogon tribe, which still exist today, they said that there was a star, the dog star, Sirius, and that it had a satellite moon going round it that took about 50 years to complete an orbit. And they said this moon is very, very heavy, the heaviest star in the sky. At that time, no one had any evidence that there was a satellite going around Sirius. As we got more sophisticated with the technology, they have established that indeed there is a satellite goes around Sirius. We now call it Sirius B. It takes about 50 years to do an orbit, and because it's what I think they call a collapsed dwarf star, it is amazingly heavy. So they go to the Dogon. How do you know that? Because the people from the stars told us, and it's been passed on ever since. All over the world you find the same stuff, in Central America, South America, Africa, everywhere. And a number of things also start to come into focus, interestingly. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall people come up again and again. When you look at the Sumerian text, it talks about the fact that They interbred with their human creations, creating hybrids. This is where we get into the bloodlines that run the world today, I would suggest, as we go along. In the Book of Enoch, which is another ancient text, not connected to the Sumerians as far as we know, they talk and describe the birth of strange babies, which they call the babies of the gods, the children of the gods, the children of the angels. And how do they describe these children as they grow up? Tall, blonde, with something very different about the eyes, which is exactly what this guy's told me in the last few months down in America, who works for the CIA. And then you look at Genesis. What does Genesis say for people who are into the Bible, which they have every right to be? Genesis says that the sons of God came down and interbred with the daughters of men. Now, it's an interesting thing when you get into it. Every single time the Old Testament says the word God, it is translated from a word that means God's. Elohim, Adonai, and all the rest. And what that phrase, sons of God came down to interbreed with the daughters of men, actually says in the original from which it was translated, it says sons of the gods interbred with the daughters of men. And the Old Testament can be shown now, that certainly Genesis and Exodus I'm talking about, to have been written from the same Sumerian accounts. What happened was in, I think it was 596 BC, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and the Levite priestly class, the scribes, were taken into captivity in Babylon. Babylon was a civilization that followed Sumer in the same area, so therefore had access to the Sumer accounts of what went on. This is where, in Babylon, the Levites wrote Genesis and Exodus. So in the Sumerian texts, you find the story of King Sargon the Elder, who was found in the bulrushes by a royal princess, which became Moses being found in the bulrushes in Exodus. Which is why, in the Sumerian text, it talks about the place of the gods, the Garden of Edenu, which became, in the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden. And it talks in the Sumerian text also about how, like I say, they created humanity as we know it. And what's interesting, in the same period that they're talking about, comes the scientific mystery called the missing link. When a physical form known as Homo erectus, which still shows itself in Bill Clinton today, Homo erectus walked this planet for about 1.5 million years with apparently no demonstrable change in its genetic evolution and its physical form. Suddenly, around 300,000 years ago, there was a leap to a new physical form. Very quickly, far dramatically more quickly than natural evolution would take place. There was an intervention. So conventional science and the Sumerian texts are constantly interacting with themselves. So this is one of the, just to give you a feel of it, this is one of the cylinder seals, which is some of the pictorial parts of these tablets that were found. They've been translated by a guy called Zachariah Sitchin. Zachariah Sitchin's written 5 books in a series called the Earth Chronicles, just translating what these texts say. Zachariah Sitchin is not a UFO buff. He's not looking in the sky for lights. He is a scholar and an expert in Middle Eastern and Near Eastern languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, etc. And as a result of that, he's merely translated what these things say and come to the same conclusions I'm talking about tonight. They're excellent books that I strongly recommend if you're really interested in the great detail of this. So we're looking at, again, that's another thing from the text, which could well be a rocket. And indeed, you know, when you translate what they call some of the names, they call them the Lords of the Rockets, the land of the Lords of the Blazing Rockets. And that's what I found in Chichen Itza recently in the Maya country. And unless that's, you know, it could well be a rocket. And again, the Maya also talked about this. The Native Americans, I just spoke at a Native American conference down in Santa Fe called the Star Peoples Gathering. And that was all about their belief, going back into their ancestors, about the star people who came from the sky and interbred with the women of the Native Americans. All over the world you find the same thing. Not only that, you find the gods, again and again, described as tall, white beings, like Quetzalcoatl. The god of Central America was described as a white god. All over the world you find this. Now, there are definitely other extraterrestrial races involved here. I mean, someone described it, a lady called Linda Moulton Howe, who's done a lot of research into the cattle mutilations that have gone on around the world. She said investigating this stuff is like researching in a hall of mirrors while standing on a quicksand floor. And it really is, because of the disinformation that's trying to divert you from whatever the truth is in there. But there are other races involved, what we call the Greys, like the ones that were found in the Roswell incident, etc. But there's certainly this blonde-haired, blue-eyed thing keeps coming up again and again. And let's take it more into the modern world. The Nazis. Is Lethbridge here? He'd enjoy this bit. He'd enjoy this bit, because the Nazis, when you look at their true history, were created by a network of malevolent secret societies, Thule Society, Edelweiss Society, Brill Society, and other even more malevolent ones that were much more elite. And therefore, they had access to this underground flow of knowledge that perhaps is not the true history of humankind, but is certainly a truer one than the one the public are told. And what did they get obsessed with? A blonde-haired, blue-eyed master race. And I think that that master race is actually of extraterrestrial origin originally in the ancient world. And here's, again, some of the Mesopotamian, that's for anyone who's not into it, the same area as Sumer. This is some of their depictions of their gods. Excuse me. I mean, there's one, I haven't got it here, it's ever so funny. I've got an illustration, I must put it on slide. It's of something that was found on a drawing on a wall, an ancient drawing. And when the archaeologists looked at it, they thought, well, crikey, I know what it looks like, but we can't have that. So they said it was a moth. Well, it's the only moth with twin engines I've ever seen. Now, when I talked about the fact that all this is very relevant to what's going on today, by the way, we go on a little journey here. It all fits together. I think it does anyway. Credo Mutwa, when I talked to him, this Zulu shaman, I talked to him for 5 hours. Eventually, he talked about this global elite and all that stuff, and he knows what's going on. We talked about that for ages. And then he got onto the extraterrestrial stuff and how he'd been abducted in Zimbabwe many years ago, and what happened to him. The Greys seemed to be the description, definitely were, of what he described. But then I said to him, just as a matter of throwaway line, I said, do you think that there's any extraterrestrial involved with this global elite? Oh, of course, he said. Same as the other guy. I said, well, which ones do you think are involved? He said, the Sikaza, which translates in his language as the deceitful ones. And you know when you ask someone a question and you know what they're going to say? I said, what do the Sikaza look like? He said, they're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and very tall. I thought I've heard that before. And he drew this because he's a bit of an artist, Credo. He's a wonderful man. And he drew this because he was telling me that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before the whites arrived in Africa, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people from the stars, as they said, that they used to interact with, they called them Mzungu. And when the whites first arrived to some of these tribes hundreds of years later, they called them the Mzungu because they thought these geezers were back, because they looked so similar. And what was interesting, you know how the universe, the flow of life tends to guide you into areas that say a big hint. You're on the right lines, darling. I came back from Credo Mutwa, and I was in South Africa staying at this home in Johannesburg, organising my talks. And I'm writing this book, Biggest Secret at the moment, so I've got this laptop thing around, and I just sat there and I put into the computer the very little bits, some of the stuff that he'd said. Then I shut it down, went downstairs, sat down. There's no one around, but the telly's on. Someone's left the telly on. This is about an hour after I've left the guy. And a program starts to come on, and it's a film. And I thought, I'll give this a look, a bit of chewing gum for the mind, you know, see what's coming on. What was it? It was a film called The Arrival, about an extraterrestrial race that had taken over the planet and no one realized it because they looked like you and me. So, when you then add what this guy and other people have said to me in the modern world, yeah, they look like you and me and all that stuff, you start to think, hold a minute. Is there a common theme of control on this planet that can be charting all the way through this? And this is where we move on from this area now, because one of the things these texts say, and other texts say around the world in accounts and legends and stuff, is that the gods interbred with humans, creating a hybrid race, which the Egyptians used to call the demigods, and that after a time, particularly in the last 2 millennium BC, these gods, who are not great in number, this is the important point, they started operating more behind the scenes and created bloodlines, royal and priestly bloodlines, that were the middlemen running and controlling the situation of humanity on their behalf. And it was interesting, you know, something occurred to me when I was doing this research. Somebody said something to me 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. Only just pennies started to drop for how this fits in. I met this guy in England who worked for the British Home Office in the 60s. And he said, oh, something you might be interested in. He said, when I was working for the Home Office in the 60s, he said, I was involved in a project which has never been published, interviewing people who claim to have had interaction and communication with extraterrestrial life. Oh, why? He said, yes, we did it. We did about 1,800 interviews. And he said the Russians, the Japanese, the Americans, the Scandinavians were doing the same. And after a while, he said, we pulled our findings and we had about 62,000 interviews. And we were looking for correlations and common themes. He said, we got rid of about 20% because they were bloody off the wall. We thought they were. And I said, well, what were any themes that came through? He said, well, one of them was this. He said, we were told that a race, that these people have been told by various interactions that a race of extraterrestrials have come to the planet in the ancient world, that they were basically tall, white, blue-eyed, and that they had become the gods of ancient Sumer. And that these had broken up into 2 streams. One, those that had interbred with humanity, and by now you wouldn't see the difference between them and humanity. And there was the other group that had retained its genetic purity, and these things that these people were told lived under the ground. And again, another common theme all over the world is the theme of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, highly advanced people who live within the earth. Now, like I say, it's like researching in mirrors on a quicksand floor, so I'm just putting this out as information, but there are themes starting to become very clear. And so I started to look at if it was possible to pick up any bloodlines in the ancient world that could be brought through to today, that could be this stream of what we call hybrids or whatever. And I started over the last year to realize that yes, that can certainly be done. What happened? 2 things. These bloodlines, we'll pick these up as we go along at the relevant point. These priestly and royal bloodlines, they became the pharaohs, they became the kings, they became the rulers. This is where we get the term divine right of kings. ruling on behalf of not God, but the gods. And what I think we've done, the more I look at this, is become mixed up, and we've been encouraged to become mixed up between two things. God, for want of a term, that is everything that exists, including us, the consciousness that is everything, and the gods, which were extraterrestrials. And of course they call them gods. In the 1930s, there was a group of American and Australian airmen who landed in a primitive area of New Guinea in an aeroplane which the tribespeople had never seen. These guys started a religion. They thought the gods had arrived. They hadn't seen anything like it. They had to be gods. They were just airmen in a plane. So you can see where all this kind of came from. And this is why we have this contradiction in parts of the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, of a loving God, and in the Old Testament, a series of versions of God who just want, kind of blood and sacrifice and gore, don't they? Because that's not God. Of course there's a contradiction, because it's not God we're talking about there. And so, the other thing that happened, alongside these bloodlines, was a structure started to be set up, and again you could show this right back in the ancient world, of mystery schools and secret societies which created a structure in which knowledge, advanced knowledge, coming from this advanced race, or races more like, this is a number of them, not just the blondes, which has been passed on at the top level of this secret society mystery school network through initiation to the chosen few. And as could be shown, and I do it in great detail in this book I'm working on, the same force set up institutions in the public arena, religions, politics, etc., to suck that knowledge out of circulation. So therefore, the knowledge, the true knowledge of where we come from, who we are, and the nature of possibility, has been sucked out of circulation and held in fewer and fewer hands. What happened? Every time this force, under different names, the British Empire, whatever, Spanish Empire, went into a native country, when the Spanish went into Central America, the Spanish into South America, the British into North America, the British into Australia and Africa, what did they do every time? They destroyed the native knowledge, they destroyed the books, they destroyed the accounts, they killed the people that held the native oral traditions. In other words, they wanted to create a year zero where we went into limbo land in terms of knowledge of who we are, where we come from. And what have we reached in the modern world today? It's a sobering thought. 5 billion people on this planet, apparently. The overwhelming vast majority today, tonight, have no idea who they are. They've no idea about the nature of life. They've no idea where they came from. They've no idea where they're going. They are living their life in a complete vacuum of knowledge and understanding of even who they are. What are we doing here? Because this vacuum has been created, but this advanced knowledge has been passed on through this secret society network. Now, one of the areas of knowledge that has been held there and kept out here has been this: the knowledge of the true nature and power and influence of the sun. What you're looking at there is a sunspot. Some of these sunspots are about 100,000 miles high, and they're when the sun emits extremely powerful magnetic energy which comes through the solar system on the solar wind, and at its most powerful it can take out computer systems and power supplies. There has always been two levels of knowledge, often in the same piece of writing. What has happened is religious texts, including the Bible, have been written so that the initiate of the knowledge would read them in a certain way, read the numerology, read the esoteric language and symbolism, and the public then take them literally, and a religion comes out of it. In the same way, in the ancient world, you had the people at the top who understood the true nature of the sun and its influence and power and how you could use it, and you had the rest of the population who worshipped it as a flipping god. Same thing. So there was a guy called Maurice Cottrell, who was a kind of scientific researcher. And earlier on in his life, he researched very much into sunspot activity. He became very interested in it. And he worked out cycles of emissions of magnetic energy from the sun. First of all, he realized that within these cycles, you could chart the rise and fall of civilizations and great changes on the Earth. If you know what those flows do, then you can make sure if you want to make something happen, you do it at that time, because it's going to go with this flow of energy and have a great chance of success. This is why this elite today, right to the present day, never have a meeting or never have an event or anything, announce anything or do anything that it doesn't fit the esoteric, astrological situation that would give it the best chance of success. This is why you have certain years, like 1933, 1963, when incredible amounts of things happen in the same year. So what Cottrell found and did was he charted these cycles of sunspot activity, emissions of energy from the sun, small cycles, medium cycles, big cycles. Later on in his life, he came across the Maya knowledge, information that was left by the Maya in Central America, and they got it from previous peoples, and eventually I would say you go back to this same extraterrestrial interaction, not necessarily with the same ones, man. And what staggered him was that the cycles of human evolution, small cycles, medium cycles, great cycles, which the Maya talked about, were even over the great cycles within a few years of Cottrell's cycles of sunspot activity. In other words, the sun is seriously important if you understand its real effect on what happens on planet Earth. If you know that, and the mass of the people haven't got a clue, already you are in a very, very big position of power. And you can follow, therefore, this obsession with the sun among the elite of the ancient world. This is Akhenaten, but in Egypt, just an example. Very much, obviously, the Egyptian situation involved in the sun. And interestingly, what they say in the ancient accounts of Egypt is, first of all, Egypt was controlled by the gods, then by the demigods, and then eventually into the pharaohs. It takes the same situation that the Sumerians describe. Here you have the throne in Sri Lanka, again, sun. This is Roman, sun. And this is George Washington's chair. George Washington was a high-degree Freemason. A lot of the founding fathers were high-degree Freemasons. Of the 56 signatories on the American Declaration of Independence, 50 were known Freemasons, only one was known not to be. Now, we'll get into the Freemason stuff later, but that holds this knowledge at its highest expression. It's one of the secret societies at the peak of the pyramid that holds this knowledge from the ancient world. And this symbol, the rising sun, is one of the symbols of this global elite, which can be picked up again and again and again. And you'll see it emerge as we go through the night in transnational corporation logos, etc. Because they have a symbolic language which initiates understand, and the mass of the people think is just a symbol. What's that matter? You know? Because symbols of various kinds generate an energy, and they talk to the subconscious. I mean, even today's science realizes this now. So in advertising and what have you, and when they're trying to get over something and get us to think in a certain way, they'll put symbols out which are talking to the subconscious, because they understand how it works. Again, this is Zoroaster. In the ancient world, the depiction of people like that, with the halo and stuff, very much is a symbol of the sun all the time. Could be other things as my research goes on, but certainly the sun god became an obsession. This is the depiction of the planet in Sumerian, that they say this extraterrestrial Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came from. They say it was a planet called Nibiru, which goes around, they say, through Jupiter and Mars, and then out well beyond Pluto, and takes about, Sitchin estimates, 3,600 years in its orbit. What they say in these texts, interestingly, is that hundreds of millions of years ago, in fact, 4,600 million years ago, this Nibiru planet came through between Mars and Jupiter, and some of its satellites had collided with a planet that was in that area, which they called Tiamat. And what they say happened was that the debris of Tiamat became what the Sumerian text called the Great Band Bracelet, what we call the asteroid belt. And where is the asteroid belt? It's between Mars and Jupiter. Now, at the time these texts came, and even to the present day, science cannot explain what the asteroid belt is or where it came from. So they depicted, for some reason known to them, Nibiru as a cross with a circle around it. And this is another symbol which comes up again and again, as we'll see, in the modern world within the symbolic language of the people that run the world today. This is another possibility, and indeed part of the reason the cross and the circle comes up again and again, as we'll see. I'll show some symbols, modern symbols in a minute, to back this up. What they did in the ancient world was that they took the circle, which was the cycle of the sun through the year, through the zodiac signs and through the 12 months, and they put a cross in the middle of it, which broke up into these seasons with the solstices and the equinoxes, etc. And they put the sun on the cross in the middle. And if you look in the ancient world, you can find at least 16 ancient god figures, most of which are said to have been born on December the 25th. Why? Because at this point, which is what we call Christmas, just before Christmas, that is the winter solstice, 21st, 22nd of December, when the sun, in symbolic language, reaches the bottom of its cycle. In their language, symbolically, the sun died. By 3 days later, 25th of December, the sun had demonstrably started its journey back into the height of its power in the sun. So they picked December the 25th as the time when the sun was born. The man who decided at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Roman emperor, that Jesus was born on December the 25th, didn't worship Jesus, he worshipped a god called Sol Invictus, which translates as the unconquered sun. And what they did in the ancient world is that they showed symbolically that the sun went through the year, and by the time it got to Easter, which was a fixed point then, it was entering the sign of the ram or the lamb, Aries. And they used to have ceremonies sacrificing lambs because they said the lamb would die so the sins of the people would be forgiven and they would have great returns in their crops and whatever. So when you go back, you start to see some of the things that have been weaved into belief systems in a very different light. And so if you look at that symbol, which comes up again and again at this time, the cross and the circle, you can start to see it coming up around. There's the Celtic cross. That's NATO, a wholly owned subsidiary of the global elite. Again and again this symbol comes up. That's on the British pound. That's the CIA symbol, the cross and the rays of the sun, which is what you see again and again, like that thing around the symbolic picture of Zoroaster. The eagle comes up again and again as part of their symbol. That has evolved out of the mythical bird of Egypt, the phoenix. There could be another reason for that too, which will have to be on another time when I've done more research into it. And this is what I found in the city of London just a few weeks ago. we're going to come to this as I go along, but the City of London is the epicenter of today's global manipulation and has been for many centuries. And this is across the road in the great financial district of London from St Paul's Cathedral, in the heart, the epicenter of this. And that's on a financial building, and it's exactly the same stuff that you find in the ancient world. Indeed, apart from the cross, you can see this exactly the same as I've been looking at. And in the paintings, a lot of information has been symbolically passed on. This is a very simple example. Some of the paintings, particularly Renaissance paintings, carry incredibly detailed esoteric knowledge in the way that, in the symbols that they portray. But here's a simple example of what I'm talking about. This is a famous picture by Leonardo da Vinci, The Last Supper. Leonardo da Vinci was a high initiate of this secret society network, and he was funded by a family, a famous Venetian family, very powerful Venetian family called the de Medici family, that were also, of course, involved in this scam. And the de Medici family were the same family that funded Christopher Columbus. And that will become relevant as the night unfolds and we look to how this affects North America. So what has Leonardo da Vinci done here? As has been pointed out, he's symbolized Jesus as the Son, and he's broken up the 12 disciples into 4 sets of 3. Again, another symbolic way of portraying the same theme. And I have to say, some of the other paintings that I've come across, the esoteric stuff is really deep. According to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that book that was about various bloodlines and stuff and secret societies, they say that Leonardo da Vinci was actually a grand master of an elite secret society, very much still involved today, called the Priory of Sion. So, let's start making our way into the modern world here. It's interesting that this area of the world, from Egypt down through Palestine into what was Turkey today, what was Persia and Asia Minor, and then across into what is now Iraq, formerly Sumer, and Iran, and down to the Persian Gulf. This area, the Caucasus Mountains up here, has not only where these Anunnaki and their various types were supposed to be operating in the ancient world, first openly and then more behind the scenes. If you look at this same area of the world, every major religion has come out of that area of the world. And if anyone thinks the Hindu religion didn't, well, the Hindu religion and the Sanskrit language and the sacred books, the Vedas of the Hindu religion, they came as a result of an Aryan race coming out of the Caucasus Mountains and down into that area of the world 1,000 years old BC. And it's kind of interesting, when I've been researching this, again and again, in terms of bloodlines and stuff, the Caucasus Mountains area has come up again and again in terms of some kind of white race. And it's interesting, I don't know where it actually came from, but what do they call white people in America? They call them Caucasians. What a funny thing to call them. Except, when you start to get into this, this becomes very, very relevant indeed. Now, as I'm going to chart in detail in this book I'm writing, and nearly finished, but I can only summarize now, you can show very comfortably how the peoples of this area and those various bloodlines of various kinds actually became overwhelmingly the people of Europe. What happened was that they changed their name as they went across, and so we lose the plot. The Scythians became the Saka, Saki, Saxon, and eventually the Saxons. Another group down here, the Sumeri, through various changes in their name, became the Celts. And so, when you look at some of the classic expressions of culture up here, you start to realize where they came from. You know, in Ireland, the classic Irish symbol, the shamrock name came from North Africa. In Scotland, of course, it's the bagpipes, if you can stand hearing them. The bagpipes came from this same area. So you can follow these peoples out through and out into that area. And within these peoples were these bloodlines. And we'll come to that. The Lady Diana thing is very relevant to this, funnily enough. But let me just pick up one example of what I'm talking about, which spans the time. There were a group of people, a race of people down here called the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians, or part of their hierarchy anyway, in the ancient world, moved to northern Italy and became the Venetians. The Venetians created a maritime and financial empire in that area that became very famous and very powerful. And their financial empire was based on what? It was based on lending people money that doesn't exist and charging them interest on it. Have I heard that somewhere before? and so it's amazing how this fits together as we go on here. So this empire went up into an area that became known as Lombardy. Now Lombard is still a word that's constantly used in the financial system. One of the most famous streets in the City of London financial district is called Lombard Street. Now what happened then is that these peoples, or representatives of them, and by this time they'd become known as the Black Nobility. The reason for this nickname was that while they were in Venice and that area, they started to invent aristocratic titles for themselves and take over titles that already existed. So they got this nickname, the Black Nobility. And the Black Nobility, or representatives of them, moved up through Germany and eventually settled in Holland and Amsterdam and became their epicenter. Now, while they were in Amsterdam, this is when the Dutch started settling South Africa. In 1688, one of this black nobility, called William of Orange, was manipulated onto the throne of England when he married Queen Mary. And then this whole crowd moved en bloc, the black nobility, and parked their epicenter in London. Now, this is interesting because of what followed this. One of the things that William of Orange did was sign the charter for the Bank of England. And what came out of this situation was the creation of the financial centre we call the City of London, which to this day is the epicenter, or one of them, of this global manipulation. Interestingly, in the years before William arrived, because these guys don't make it up as they go along, someone set fire to the old City of London. And as always, they need a patsy, don't they? They need a Lee Harvey Oswald. So they blame the fire, the Great Fire of London, on some guy burning the cakes in Pudding Lane. They torched it. Of course they torched it because they wanted a blank sheet of land on which they could build their new London, which was going to be the epicenter of their empire. And if you look at who designed and built the City of London, it's interesting to see their connections. Most famously, it was a guy called Sir Christopher Wren who designed St Paul's Cathedral in the heart of the City of London. Sir Christopher Wren was a high initiate of the secret society network. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. What else followed this black nobility from the Middle East and this area, parking themselves in London? We had the emergence of the Great British Empire. Now, when I was a kid, I could never work out how a group of islands that you can hardly see on the globe could have an empire that spanned the flipping world. Now I know. It wasn't the Great British Empire, it was the great empire of this group that had parked itself in London. They'd parked themselves somewhere else, it would have been the Great Dutch Empire. After they settled themselves in London, by the way, the English started settling South Africa and kicking the Dutch out. Now they're using the English people as pawns for their game rather than the Dutch as they did before. So what happened was, when the Great British Empire emerged, well, what was great about it, mind? And there was overt, in-your-face control, which always has a finite life. Because when you know you're under dictatorship, eventually the human desire for freedom will rebel against it. So what has been done, particularly in this century, is that as the Great British Empire has come in and contracted on the surface, and people have been given their independence, what was left out there in these countries, including Canada, were A, the bloodlines, and B, the secret society network that continues to run Canada from London, just as America has always been run from London. And that's how it works. The same people are running the show. South Africa is run from London. What happens is it's a very simple structure. You have the epicenter in London, which decides the agenda globally. They have branch managers in each country that run those countries on behalf of the central agenda. The bank manager, I guess it is too, yeah. The branch manager in South Africa is the Oppenheimer family, who control about 80% of the companies on the South African stock market. They own the mining industries, which are the foundation of the South African economy. And they run the show on behalf of the central agenda. In America, it's the Rockefellers. They're the branch managers and the cartel of bloodline families around them. And you can see the branch managers in Canada, the Bronfmans, the Blacks, and people like this. That's how it works. It's dead simple, or it couldn't work, because it has to be simple structure. So, again, what happened when the British went around the world and this empire happened, etc.? They took the knowledge out of circulation. All being coordinated because it comes from a high level of intellectual advanced knowledge, which has been the common theme all the way through it. And I would say, the more I research this, that is extraterrestrial in nature. So let's have a look at how the thing affects North America and the Americas. This is an interesting little period of time that shows how this thing has worked to the present day. One of the secret societies within this network, to this day, can be picked up at the time of the Crusades in the Middle East, and they're called the Templars, the Knights Templar. At that same time, another group called the Knights of Malta, the Knights Hospitaller of St. John of Jerusalem, now known as the Knights of Malta, started, also operating in the Middle East at the time of the Crusades, and another group called the Teutonic Knights that were linked, obviously, to Germany. But let's pick up the Templars. All these organizations, by the way, still exist today, under different names, sometimes their own. The Templars are a funny kind of origin. There were about 9 of them to start with, and they said that they'd formed themselves because they wanted to protect pilgrims who were visiting the Holy Land. Well, there was 9 of these geezers. I mean, they're going to protect a whole lot of pilgrims, aren't they? They parked themselves in Jerusalem, next to Temple Mount, as we call it today. And after about 9 years, suddenly something happened. The word is that they found something. Whatever it was, dramatic changes took place. Suddenly, they expanded their membership massively, particularly in France, first of all, where it originated from, but then more widely. Not only that, to join the Templars, you had to give them all your wealth. And these Templars were signing up the noble families of Europe. Excuse me, what do they know? And as this evolved over the years, although it's been written out in conventional history, the Templars were rivaling the Roman Church for both power and influence. They had the crown heads of Europe up to their neck in debt to them. Because what were the Templars doing? They got such fantastic wealth. They set up financial centers in Paris and London. This is in the 1100s and the 1200s. And they were lending people money that doesn't exist and charging interest on it. Heard that before. Eventually, they had a massive fleet, and they were running the show. They were collecting the taxes in London. They held the crown jewels for a time. In 1307, the King of France, Philip the Fair, issued orders on Friday the 13th, which is why that's always been considered unlucky ever since. And some of the Templars were arrested. He wanted to purge the lot because he wanted the loot because it was up to his neck in debt to him. But most of the Templars realized it was coming, and they got away. And they went to 2 areas of the world particularly. which is very relevant to North America and to the manipulation today. When Philip the Fair went into the financial headquarters of the Templars in Paris to get the loot, he found it empty because they'd got away with the fleet. And they went to two places, these Templars. One of the places they went was to Portugal, where they operated behind a front called the Knights of Christ, which was a maritime organization. The Grand Master of the Knights of Christ was a guy called Prince Henry the Navigator, a famous explorer, who had access to maps of the world that were not available in the public arena. Some of these ancient maps that map the world that conventional history said they didn't know existed have actually been established and identified in this century. Interestingly, one of the sea captains of Prince Henry the Navigator and a member of the Knights of Christ was the father-in-law of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus wasn't looking for India, tripped over the Americas, knew exactly where he was going. And Columbus was funded by the de' Medici family, one of the black nobility of Venice, which had funded and sponsored Leonardo da Vinci. Interestingly, no one in conventional history has put together Christopher Columbus, who discovered this part of the Americas, it says here, and John Cabot, who left the Templar port, still artifacts found there, churches and stuff, Templar port of Bristol, and discovered, it says here, North America. But they were connected. John Cabot's real name was Giovanni Caboto, and he was a naturalized Venetian. And he operated in Genoa at the same time as Columbus in the same secret society network. And both defined the Americas within 4 or 5 years of each other. Yes, I believe that. It's a scam. I mean, I'll show detailed evidence in this book coming up that the Americas were found perhaps 1,000 years, definitely 100 years before Columbus. They knew it was there. It was just time to take it over in part as the agenda of the flow of time and what have you. Because they do things at certain times, certain years, like I say. Not too quick, not too slow, at exactly the right point in this agenda that they're working to. Now, the other place that they went to was Scotland after the purge in 1307. Now, the reason they did that, they went around the west coast of Ireland and into Scotland, is because Scotland was packed with bloodline families. At the time of David I of Scotland, a group of families in what we now call Belgium and northern France suddenly upped and moved to Scotland. And within 150 years, they were running Scotland. And who were these families? They're what we now call the classic Scottish families. Oh, MacDougall and Macduff. Oh, it's from Scotland. No, they come from here. And eventually they come from here. And one of these, the group, the bloodline families that went over to England with William the Conqueror in 1066 was called the St. Clairs, which became the famous Scottish clan or family, the Sinclairs. And the Sinclairs were part, when they were the St. Clairs in France, of the creation of the Knights Templar. So the Templars went to very, very fertile land. And what happened is to keep the thing going behind another different name, they eventually changed their name, though the same face with a different mask, to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. That is why the most pervading secret society in the world today, that pervades global banking, business, politics, media, is called the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, named after that little country at the top of the British Isles. It's because that's where the Templars went. The Templars also owned land around the City of London and the area today from which the whole thing is, I think, orchestrated, although there are other centres around the world too, of course. So let's just look as we move on here quickly at this guy, old Chris. I got interested in him. I thought, I'll give you a look, old Chris, may I? We'll have a look at you. And I find his name wasn't Columbus. He signed most of the time his name as Colon. Maybe they called him Colon because he was full of... No. So then I started to think, why Columbus? Why did he invent this name Columbus? And hold on a minute, why is it British Columbia? Why is it District of Columbia where they put Washington DC? Why Columbia Pictures, a wholly owned subsidiary of this elite? Why Columbia University, which was built with the drug money from the opium wars accumulated by this elite? Why Columbia Broadcasting, CBS? Why did they spell it with a U? And it's Columbia. I didn't work that out as a kid. Well, I can work it out now. These people, going back to that, we'll get into this as we go along in the sequence here. They have deities which they worship, symbols which they worship, symbolic deities. And what they do is they'll take a symbol which, so the mass of the population will be positive, and they'll symbolize it in their language as exactly the opposite. So what the Nazis did, Mr. Lethbridge, is what they did with the swastika, which is an ancient esoteric symbol, they turned it around to symbolize the negative. The classic symbol of Satanism is taking the pentagram and inverting it. This is what it's all about. One of the things that they do to symbolize the opposite of positive is they use the symbol of the dove. Now to us that means peace, so to them it means literally death and destruction. And this answers another mystery, which is why Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Provisional IRA, that has been blowing people to bits in Northern Ireland for decades, has as its symbol the dove. Excuse me? It's because to them it means death and destruction. Because all these things in Northern Ireland are all linked to the same group. Now, in the ancient world, the name for dove was Columba. So I was talking about this in South Africa, and a French guy in the audience said, you know that the French word for dove to this day is Columba. Columba, dove, was another name for their deity Aphrodite. And the Roman Secret Society network worshipped a deity they called Venus Columba, Venus the dove. There was a legendary queen of ancient Babylon called Queen Semiramis, and Semiramis means dove. So dove, Columba, became one of their symbols in their symbolic language. So one of the groups, inner groups, that was part of the taking over of America, and at the time of the War of Independence, replacing overt control with covert control, was called the Columbian faction. And this is why we get Columbia as a constant symbolic word, and why they plumped their capital in America in the District of Columbia, and why they called him Columbus. Because initiates would read this like a book, we just think it's a name. There's Liz and Phil. These are one of the bloodline families, the Windsors. Because we don't have a royal family in Britain and a royal family in Holland, Netherlands. We have a royal tribe, and they're all interrelated. Do you know, it's interesting. I've been looking at some of the genealogy of the people that run America. In the last few weeks, I've come across some people who've done some real academic research in this. What happened when the British came out to America and North America, and then retreated, apparently, as they left the bloodlines out there? Do you know 19 American presidents are genetically related to Edward III? Over 30 American presidents are genetically related, including George Bush, to Alfred the Great of England and Charlemagne, the famous monarch of France. They're the same people. George Bush and the Queen of England are related. It bloody shows and all. And if you did the genealogy, you would find, I'm sure the same applies to these people in Canada. Because what happens is this, the more I understand this, they have official relationships, and those official relationships, which are based on genetic lines, just like they interbreed in royalty, who can we get so-and-so on a genetic basis to marry? And they produce children with the name of the bloodline families. But what they also do is have a stream of children outside of the official relationships, and they have different names. And then they become the presidents and the prime ministers, and people don't say, hold on a minute, the president's called Rockefeller, the vice president, the secretary of state, what goes on? No, they've got different names. I'm absolutely convinced that Bill Clinton is actually a Rockefeller, and that his father was a guy called Winthrop Rockefeller, who had a major estate in Arkansas. And that famous handshake, when Clinton shook hands with President Kennedy, you might have seen that a number of times, that was actually set up by Winthrop Rockefeller, who was just out of shot when it took place. And then this apparently kind of ordinary guy, kid from Arkansas, with an ordinary background, as people might say, ends up being a Rhodes Scholar and funded to go to Oxford, and the Rhodes Scholarships are for the elite kids. Just a coincidence. Now, so the Windsors are fundamentally involved in this. They're not top of the pyramid, but they are knowingly involved here. And some of the things that they've been involved in are absolutely incredible. And I've come across recently a lady who was Princess Diana's close confidant, and I won't say any more for now, but a close confidant and friend for 9 years. And my goodness me, have I learned a few things. First of all, Princess Diana used to say of the Windsors, in all seriousness, they are not human. And some of the things that go on in the background, which I will document in this book I'm writing, will actually make flipping hair curl. And what Princess Diana knew, once she had become aware through experience, was that all they wanted her for, in her own words, was to be a brood mare. They wanted the Spencer genes, because they're into the genetics of this thing. They don't marry for love. So, I mean, Prince Andrew is not the child of Prince Philip. His father's a guy called Lord Porchester, who is the Queen's racing manager, because they don't marry for love. And certainly not, this guy is a serious kind of player, old Prince Philip, at his level of the game. So they offered the job, and I know this from impeccable sources, they offered the job of marrying Charles, first of all, to Diana's sister. And when she turned it down, they still wanted the Windsor genes. And Diana understood this in the end. And bingo, they get this naive then, but not later, 19-year-old, and they get the Spencer genes. And if you look, after the children arrived, that's when they started pushing her out. Don't want you now, got your genes. And interestingly, over the 9-10 years that these people were close, Diana said to her a number of times, they're going to kill me, you know. I'm too dangerous to them. They're going to kill me. And that's what they did. I don't know whether you know, I mean, it's in our face if we only looked at it. I don't know whether you know that in that route that the car took before it crashed in the tunnel, all the traffic cameras, including those in the tunnel, were switched off at the time. All the police frequencies for that part of Paris were switched off in the 20-25 minutes before the crash. Accident, my bum. And it's also interesting, you know, the thing I've got into is the real nature of how these people get into the ritual of it, and how they go back to this ancient ritual they've followed all the way through, including the sacrifice of children and stuff. There was a group of people which can be picked up at the time of the Trojan Wars, and you can follow them through Asia Minor, up through the Caucasus Mountains, into Europe, and eventually they settled in what we now call France. And we actually get the name France from the name of these people. They were called the Sicambrian Franks. And they had a royal elite offshoot called the Merovingians. The Merovingians and the Sicambrian Franks established what is now the city of Paris, and they named it. They worshipped a goddess called Diana. They built underground chambers in Paris for the various rituals to the goddess Diana. Those underground chambers, or the site of them, is now another underground chamber. It's the Pont de l'Alma tunnel where the car crashed. And when you get I've got a lot more that if I had more time I could talk about here, about this, but when you get into the ritual of it, you start to realize that it's not a coincidence, these things, they're real. And they did her in. This is, quickly through this bit, this is the Sinclair estate now in Scotland near Edinburgh, and this is one of the holy grails, the sacred sites of this elite in its belief system. It's called Rosslyn Chapel. Rosslyn Chapel was included in the stonework were things like sweet corn plants and cactus plants and stuff that were only found in America. Stonework of this building was built, as the building itself was, before Columbus left to find the Americas. They'd already been there. Now this is a Templar, and this is a Templar cross. Important, this red cross on a white background, and it's very much like the Maltese cross as it goes out at the ends, right? Now just hold that, red cross on the white background. This is a painting by another initiate depicting Jesus again, the sun, and look, there's the cross there on the halo, and there's the Templar cross, red cross on the white background. Now this is why we get the organization today called the Red Cross. The Red Cross was founded after correspondence in the Times newspaper during the Crimea War, and became what it is today. Now, 90-odd% of people that work for the Red Cross are genuine people, because they're pyramids. But the real reason the Red Cross exists at the peak of the pyramid is because if you're orchestrating wars and what have you, or whatever your manipulation is, the Red Cross allows you to get inside a country whenever you like almost, because they can get in times of war and what have you. So it's great for manipulation. They use the Red Cross for this, while most of the people involved are very genuine. And not coincidentally, that is the flag of England, the Templar Cross. What the Templars flew on their ships various times was what we call the skull and bones. The skull and bones is another symbol that goes from the ancient world to the present day. Skull ceremonies have been very much part of their ritual all through these thousands of years I'm talking about. The Templars indeed, during their purge in 1307, were accused of these skull ceremonies and what have you. An organization in America called the Russell Trust was one of the major companies that ran opium to China for the British, and is still involved today in running drugs to the children of North America, etc. The Russell Trust, on their ships, flew the skull and bones. And what else did the Russell Trust do? It set up a satanic blood-drinking secret society in America called the Skull and Bones Society, which has among its number some of the main players in America in the last 100 years. The most famous member today of the Skull and Bones Society is George Bush. Now, the Skull and Bones Society is just another front for the same, another mask for the same face. Here is its headquarters on the campus, or near the campus of Yale University. And what goes on in there, goodness knows what. Well, we do know. One of the initiation ceremonies, and George Bush would have gone through this, you have to lie naked on your back in a coffin while you shout out details of your sexual experiences while wearing a ribbon in a very strategic place. I've never seen George in the same light since I realised that. They take 15 elite students from the bloodline families every year. Yale, Princeton, Columbia University, Harvard, they're all fronts for this group. Another symbol that is a classic, which is on the dollar bill there, is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, the capstone missing, capstone lifted off the pyramid. And if you count the number of levels there and the number in the letters and stuff, it is a mass of classic esoteric numerology and symbolism. And the pyramid with the capstone missing, the pyramid and the all-seeing eye, or the eye of Lucifer, the eye of Horus, whatever name they give to this deity, this negative deity that they follow, is a symbol that comes up again and again and again. Anyone know where that is? No? Yeah, pyramid with the capstone missing. That's a railway that comes across to stop that. That's Dealey Plaza. That's where they killed Kennedy. In Texas. That's where they shot Kennedy. That's where they shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And if that was a one-off and you didn't do the research on their ritual and their obsession with it, you'd write it off as a coincidence that that is a pyramid with a capstone missing. But it isn't, as we'll see when we get to the street plan in Washington. And what did the Freemasons do after they killed Kennedy on that same site? They did a depiction of this, and I'll come to it in a second. One of the themes that you pick up in Greek mythology and mythology all the way through is of the one that took fire, knowledge, from the gods and gave it to some humans. And what seems to have happened, if you look at the Sumerian texts and other accounts of the ancient world, is that these Anunnaki, or their hybrids, the giants as the Old Testament talks about them, took knowledge of the gods, very advanced knowledge, because a lot of these extraterrestrials are very positive. We're talking about one group here, or groups, and gave it to some human beings, the priestly bloodlines and the royal bloodlines, but particularly the priestly bloodlines having the real knowledge. And one of the classic expressions in myth of this was Prometheus. Prometheus was the one who took fire from the gods and gave it to humans. This is Prometheus. This is the fire, the knowledge. That is the Rockefeller Center in New York. One of the bloodline families. And so the flame became a major symbol, perhaps the major symbol of this elite through the thousands of years to the present day, the illuminated ones, knowledge, Illuminati. And that's what that is. The Statue of Liberty. By the way, that's a fairground, right? Because I took that in Las Vegas, which is an exact replica of the one in New York. I've been into New York City, but it makes the same point. There you have the classic symbol, the lighted torch, the illuminated ones, the Illuminati. There you have, again, the spiked rays of the sun. Again, there could be another reason for that, but I need more research to know that. But that is supposed to be, of course, the classic symbol of America. Liberty, freedom. It was given to New York by the French Freemasons. And because they turned symbols on their head, that doesn't mean liberty, it means the opposite of it. It means we own the bloody place, guys, and you don't know it. What a laugh. What do they put on Kennedy's grave when they killed him? The eternal flame. The Illuminati. They're laughing at us. They put on the dime. The American dime. The flame. The Olympic flame. The Olympics is another wholly owned subsidiary. I love that Samaranch when he's going, who will it be? Who you decided it was going to be 4 bloody years ago, darling. That's who, you know. Unbelievable. Now, when they killed Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, just here somewhere, in this pyramid with a capstone missing, afterwards the Freemasons put that up. They killed Harvey Oswald about here. And this is the Freemasonic classic symbol of the obelisk, which goes back, of course, to ancient Egypt and before. And look what they put on the top of it. The Illuminati, the flame, the classic symbol. We don't just own the place, we kill the bloody presidents. Thank you very much. And you don't realise it. What a laugh. Now, I came across some stuff about the street plan of Washington, which was kind of interesting. And I came across it in Washington. I guess I would, wouldn't I? What they did is that when they moved down from Philadelphia after the initial creation of the United States, they moved their place to the District of Columbia in Washington. They built the street plan of Washington according to esoteric symbolism. It's a mass, not just the ones I'm going to show here, massive, smaller ones, many others. The guy they got to design the street plan, under supervision from Master Freemason George Washington and what's his name? Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote "All men are created equal." What about your 200 slaves? I wonder if they are created just as equal. This guy who wrote that, Thomas Jefferson, actually wrote that black people are genetically inferior to white. These founding fathers were not what they seemed to be. And the guy they got to design it was a guy called Charles L'Enfant, who was a French Freemason. And they designed it and continue to design it according to esoteric law and the street plan. Because if you can build a city, like they did the City of London with Sir Christopher Wren, etc., in a way that creates various symbols, all symbols generate an energy, because everything generates energy, you can create an energy field which constantly resonates to the frequency you want to get the effect that you want forevermore. So they put buildings and streets in a certain way. That's supposed to be a Jewish symbol. The Star of David, the Seal of Solomon. No, it's not. Not a lot of people know that. That is an ancient esoteric symbol. It only became associated with Jewish people when the Rothschilds started using it in the 1700s. Incidentally, the Rothschilds only became the Rothschilds in the 1700s. Before it, they were called the Bauer, B-A-U-E-R, one of the most notorious occult families of Middle Ages Germany. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. Again, here's the street plan of Washington. These streets here conform to the sun rising in the winter and summer solstice. 33 degrees streets going right the way through Capitol Hill there. 33, of course, is a big number. That's why there's 33 degrees in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Now this gets interesting, this bit. I'm going to come back to the street plan of Washington in a second. But this is 75 miles north of San Francisco. It's a place called Bohemian Grove, which Kathy O'Brien talks about, because she went there and saw the satanic ritual and whatever that goes on. This is a playground for the elite of America and further afield. Bush, Clinton, the presidents in general, Kissinger, famous entertainers like Bob Hope, etc., are members of this satanic Bohemian Grove. And when I left the hotel to have a look at it, when I spoke in San Francisco last year, I asked the lady on the reception of the hotel, about an hour's drive away, where it was, how to get there. And she says, "Why are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm a writer, I want to have a look at it." She said, "Just be very, very careful," she said, "because the number of people who've gone for a look there haven't been seen again." So I thought, that figures somehow. So this is as far as I got, because there's signs, no entry and all this stuff. But it's in the Redwood Forest, 2,700 acres, where they do their satanic ritual that can be charted back to the ancient world and comes all the way through to today. This is a picture in 1957 of Bohemian Grove. This is a guy called Glenn Seaborg who developed plutonium and was involved in the Manhattan Project, which produced the bombs dropped on Japan. 1957, And who's this guy sitting there?
Reagan.
Only Ronald Reagan, at that time a B-movie actor. And who's this? Richard bloody Nixon. What a coincidence. Both went on to be presidents of the United States. And they just happened to be members of Bohemian Grove, this elite secret corps in the 1950s. Just a coincidence. Now, this is another picture of Bohemian Grove. Where you can see that. This was taken from a distance covertly. There you have a 40-foot stone owl. Right? There's the ritual fire. And here you've got people in long robes, the Grovers, the presidents, the business leaders and stuff. Now, they are doing this ritual to this 40-foot stone owl. Now, what the heck could that represent? Back in ancient Canaan, Phoenicia, the Phoenicians, Babylon, the Carthaginians, etc., they had sacrificial rituals involving the sacrifice of children to the god Moloch or Molech. And in the Old Testament, you can see references by some of the prophets, etc., condemning the people putting their children through the sacrificial fire to Moloch. They symbolize Moloch as an owl. Moloch connects to their god Baal in the ancient world. So the owl is the symbol of this highly negative god that demands the sacrifice of children. Now, as I've researched this, I've met a number of therapists who are working with satanically abused children. And they tell me that when they talk about the rituals and some of the names used in the rituals, the main one mentioned for sacrifice of children is Moloch or Molech today. So the owl is very important to these people, which is kind of interesting because I found this in the street plan of Washington. This is the Congress building, and all I've done here is drawn a red line around the inner streets on the grounds of the Congress building. And it's a flipping owl. And if you get the top right of the dollar bill and you blow it up, a great deal you have to do it, sitting above the one is a very clear owl. Because they're laughing at us. Now, if we take this owl further around the Congress building, there it is, look, on the map. That needs a bit of an adjustment, I think, with the old, what do you call it? Still, you can pretty much see it. There it is. And if you look, what happens then, if you follow that street down, it's sitting on a pyramid. So you've got the eye, Moloch, on the pyramid in the street plan of Washington. Thanks ever so much. Now all the others are going to be out. What they do, the Satanists, because what I've understood very clearly over the last year, is that the all-encompassing pyramid of control, which encompasses all the others, banking, business, politics, is the satanic pyramid. What we call the satanic pyramid, the ritual and the black magic. So what they do with the pentagram, or any symbol, like I said earlier, they either invert it, like that, or they distort the lines so it's no longer symmetrical. And this is the street plan of Washington again. There's the Capitol building, and that's the White House. Now, if you follow that through, that's 16th Street, you get to about here, and you see a remarkable building in the streets of Washington. It's an Egyptian temple. Here's the depictions of the Sphinx. And there is the depiction, and I'll give a closer one in a minute, there we go, of the rising sun, like the one you saw on Washington's chair. So what the hell is this building doing in the middle of Washington? What is it? It's the Supreme Headquarters, 33rd degree Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Because that's where this crowd are coming from. Ancient Egypt. And all that happened when Freemasonry came in the 1600s, 1700s, is they just changed the name to Freemasonry to replace other names, so people lost the plot and didn't see that actually it's one stream through history. And this is why the bloodline families Like the Rothschilds change their name every now and again. People lose the plot. This is not, and this will be the same too in Canada, this is not a political building. It is a temple to a secret society, the Congress building. I mean, the dome comes from a word meaning place of the gods. One of the reasons the dome you find again and again in the buildings of this elite in the state capitals. Why is that called Capitol Hill? Because in the secret societies of ancient Rome, in the times of the emperors, etc., they had a sacred hill called Capitoline Hill. And so Capitoline Hill became Capitol Hill. And the High Priestess of American politics, Madeleine Albright, on her first overseas visit when she became Secretary of State, made a public pilgrimage from her point of view to Capitoline Hill in Italy. Now, it's interesting that when you look at that, I think I've seen something like that before. Where's that? Oh, there it is, St. Paul's Cathedral, created by Sir Christopher Wren, the High Initiate after they burned London and had a blank piece of land. So what they do is that they symbolize all the time. The building itself becomes a symbol of the sun, the energy they work with, solar energy, male energy overwhelmingly. And they put reflecting pools. There's one next to the Congress building like this. The reflecting pool is symbolic of the moon that reflects the sun, which of course what the moon does. This is why here in Dealey Plaza, when they built this after Kennedy's assassination, they put reflecting pools next to it on both sides. I think it's both sides, but certainly there, because that's the sun and that's the moon. And that's why the Washington Monument is one of them. The obelisk, again, major ancient Egyptian symbol, a solar symbol, and of course a phallic symbol, male energy. And what's amazing synchronicity in Washington today is that you've got that massive phallic symbol in the center of Washington, and literally a few minutes walk away, you've got another massive phallic symbol, and here it is. Bill Clinton, Bob Dole, and Newt Gingrich driving down the freeway, and they get struck by a hurricane, and it spins the car into the air, and they end up in the land of Oz, just south of Sydney it was. And Bob Dole asks for a brain, Newt Gingrich asks for a heart, and Bill Clinton says, "Where's Dorothy?" Actually, no, I really have the phrase in Canada, but we have a phrase in England. When you want to get someone to sign something, we say, "Put your moniker on this." I tell you what, it's taken on a whole new meaning in the last Just again to show you that this is not just kind of coincidence, this is another obelisk in the City of London. There's the Houses of Parliament, and this obelisk was actually placed in a place called Temple Bar, which was Templar land. Anything you see in England which has got the word temple in it, like Temple Bar, Temple Coup, that's former Templar land. And this is not a make-your-own obelisk. This is actually from the Egyptian city of On, or Heliopolis. They actually brought it over from Egypt and put it there, and they did the same in Paris, and I think they did the same in New York, but certainly Paris. And they've got here, again, right in the heart of the city of London, they've got the Sphinx, and there is St. Paul's Cathedral, which is right in the financial centre of London. And then you follow this land through, you go through Temple Bar, where all the law courts are, in the centre of the legal profession, and then you come across through that into the Houses of Parliament, the British Intelligence Headquarters, and Buckingham Palace. In that piece of land, you have the epicentre of the global manipulation today. Now, I want you to see this. This is George Washington. This is in the Smithsonian Institute. The Smithsons are another bloodline family. What happened was that they didn't have a statue to Washington, you see, when he died, so they thought we'd better have one, you know. So they commissioned this statue. Instead of Americans building it, they commissioned it from Italy. So it arrives on the boat, and they unveil it on the dockside, and people are bloody horrified. Excuse me, what you've done to our esteemed president. Look at him, he's naked from the waist up, he's got one arm in the air, one arm down, and he's got his Bill Clintons covered with a piece of cloth. What are you doing? No one can understand it. Well, maybe this will help us understand it. This is the negative accumulation or kind of composite that is often used to depict the negative force which these people get involved in. One arm up, one arm down, Bill Clinton's covered with a piece of cloth. And when you look at the symbolism of stuff, that's no coincidence. Now, this is Liberty, United States. Now, what are they doing there? They are the fasci, they call it. I think they call it the fasci, I don't pronounce it. From the word, that's where we get the word fascism from. The word fascism comes from this, and this goes back to Rome, where they took rods, symbolically, tied them together, and put an axe on the top. I've just described the European Union, which is when you get countries tied together under central